Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer here with Akiera Gilbert. We're here for season 12, episode 7 of the Social Change Career Podcast. Delighted to be here today from Medellin, Colombia. Akiera, you're joining us from the Bay Area or somewhere in California? Okay, thank you so much for making time. Today, we're going to be talking about Leading with Heart, Akiera's journey on impactful careers in mental health. Akiera is the CEO of Project Heal and has more than a decade of dedication to change making and social impact. As the CEO of Project Heal, she oversees a range of services from clinical assessments to community care, all reflecting her commitment to care and community. Her prior initiative, Body Reborn, laid the foundation for creating intersectional community healing. She has over a decade of experience in social impact, both in the US and overseas, and partnerships, working for Code.org, Echoing Green, and many other organizations. For people who have not joined us for a live stream of the Social Change Career Podcast previously, the episode will go about 50 minutes. We really enjoy making this as participatory as possible. So while you're watching, if you're joining us on LinkedIn or YouTube, please in the chat section, the comment section, let us know a little bit about your work, where you're watching from, and your questions and comments throughout. This will be converted to one of over 140 other episodes of the Social Change Career Podcast, featuring brilliant innovators from all around the world, honest career conversations about impact done right. So this will be up as a podcast episode in about 10 days. And then please go to PCN Global or any other major podcasting platform to check out the episodes, because it's, from impact investing to innovative finance to well-being, engineering for change. You can find, from people from over 20 countries, both heads of organizations to grassroots activists. That's the quick summary. So Akiera, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your wisdom, experience, and insights with us. And again, while we're going throughout this, please let us know your comments and let us know about your backgrounds for people watching. So thinking back to your earlier career, when you were a teenager, did you envision yourself working in a particular sectoral area or profession, or how did your career path get from being a younger person to being the CEO of Project Heal today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I, like many first-generation college students, always thought that I was going to be a doctor. And then my first year of university, I realized that I could not stand the sight of blood. I almost fainted the first time I saw somebody in a hospital setting actually getting blood drawn. And I had avoided blood draws on myself for the longest period of time. And so why I thought I would be a good doctor, I'm not quite sure. But I knew that I wanted to do something that in some way, shape, or form intersected with healthcare. There was a period of time in which I wanted to be an epidemiologist, and so studying the spread and evolution of disease. And then I realized that I really wanted to be able to interact with people. And ultimately, I think that had them all together was figuring out how I could best serve the world in a way that was fun, dynamic, and allowed me to be creative. Oh, Craig, I think
Unmute.
you're muted.
Oh yeah, no, I just hit unmute. So can you talk a little bit about, in terms of being first generation college student, what you decided to study, obviously moving away from medicine, at least kind of, drawing blood, and the skills you developed in college, and then how you went beyond that to your first position in the impact sector, and kind of what ties together your experience, let's say pre or post college, to how you wound up at Project Heal.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, when I went to college, I was very fortunate. I got a full tuition scholarship. And so I went in pre-med again, and then realized that that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to go down. And so my first year, I was taking a lot of different courses and trying to figure out, if I don't want to go to medical school, then what next? And ultimately, I decided to major in human services because, again, going back to what I knew in high school, I knew that I wanted to serve people and serve the world in some way. I just wasn't sure how quite best to do it yet. And human services felt like the best mix of studies. So it was like a little bit of social work, a little bit of nonprofit administration. Some folks from the human services major ended up going into government. And so it allowed me a broad base and a broad understanding of what types of social change careers are out there and how I could really play a part. And with all of that said, I remember speaking to my mom at the time, telling her that I wanted to major in human services, and she started crying. And she said, Akiera, I'm going to have to support you. I'm going to have to support you for the rest of your life. And I'm really concerned. I want to make sure that you are pursuing something that, yes, you enjoy, yes, impacts the world, and yet instill that you can support yourself. And I said, don't worry, I'll figure out a way. And ultimately, I need to be comfortable living a life that I'm happy with and pursuing a career that I'm happy with. And obviously there was a lot of privilege in that because I had this full scholarship. And so I had a lot of support and confidence in knowing that that was, I wouldn't graduate with debt, and I'd be able to take some time to explore, what might come next for me. And so while I was in university and after I took some time, I did research. I ended up going during and university to work as a consultant for a period of time. And so I worked in Mumbai, I worked in Kenya and in South Africa, ultimately trying to support different communities. And so very early on in my career, I was working with women and girls who had experienced sexual violence. And then later on in my career, I worked with men who were incarcerated. And ultimately, I realized that I was the best positioned to focus on how can we get folks more access to critical resources? How do we break down the systemic barriers? And how do I kind of weave the web, if you will? And I didn't necessarily want to be a social worker, but I did know that I wanted to create an ecosystem of care and help folks gain access to care. And so I did that in many realms, as I said, with very different communities. And what kept coming up for me, and I firmly believe, and this is something we say, or I used to say when I worked at Echoing Green, in proximate leadership, being close to the issue, having personal experience with the issue that you were trying to solve, which ultimately led to me going into mental health work and specifically supporting folks with eating disorders because of my own lived experience and familial experiences with eating disorder. And so I volunteered with folks with eating disorders for a significant period of time. And then at the start of the pandemic, I hit this point where the folks that I was supporting as a peer recovery mentor kept coming to me and saying, Akiera, I'm trying. I'm trying to break down these barriers and I'm trying to get access to care, and it's still not working. I'm not getting access to the type of care that I need in order to heal my relationship with food, in order to heal my mental health. And I got kind of tired of saying, well, more resources will come. And so we decided to build a space of our own, which is how the organization that I started before Project Heal, Body Reborn, came to be. And then Body Reborn, which was a community care space specifically for folks of color with eating disorders, ended up morphing into and joining Project Heal. And so now as CEO of Project Heal, as you said, and thank you, that bio was very sweet. I appreciate it, and very comprehensive. And now as CEO of Project Heal, I oversee the pipeline of how do we provide equitable access to eating disorder care, whether it be in the form of clinical assessments, meal support, community care, free therapeutic and treatment placements. Again, all for free.
Amazing. So a couple of thoughts. I mean, three questions. They're kind of a little bit tied. So, obviously working for code.org, Echoing Green, globally known organizations. And I think you've answered to some degree, but for people who, let's say, are working at an organization and they like the work, what is your advice? When is the right time to consider moving on to doing 100% your own thing on the issue you're most focused on? So, because I've been there too. How do you, because it's terrifying and exciting. So how do you, actually, let's just focus on that question. So how did you go about making that decision? You've said that enough people came to you and said, where are the resources and we need more support, but how, for anyone thinking about making a jump, whether it's from a stable job to a startup or a foundation or philanthropy, how do you recommend going about that decision-making process?
Yeah, there's a few key components to that, and I'll touch on the emotional, mental, spiritual, and then the more practical. And so for the more practical component, at the end of the day, most of us have to work for a living. And so I am a firm believer in making sure that you have that base of support necessary. And obviously it differs depending on your circumstances, who you are responsible for, if you're financially responsible for just yourself or others. I personally made the decision to have that balance. And so I have worked at many different places. And what I ultimately decided, even when I started Body Reborn, I was also doing other work. And the reason I decided to do that was because I still felt like there was something to gain from it. I still felt that with this other work that I was doing, number one, I was really well positioned to do it. Number two, it was something that, it's cliche, but lit my soul on fire, if you will. And three, it also fed back into the work that I had started with Body Reborn. It was helping folks gain access to care. And I thought that it was going to make me a better professional and better leader when I ultimately decided significantly down the road to shift and ultimately work on Body Reborn and now Project Heal full time.
Mhm.
So that's the practical piece of it. And everybody has different opinions on it. So again, please take that with a grain of salt. It was my experience. And as far as the emotional and the mental, I started Body Reborn when I saw that there was a gap. I saw that there was a gap in the market and there was a critical need for it. People of color did not have enough access to services that they could access for eating disorder care. And number two, they didn't have community supports that made their healing and recovery journey sustainable. And so that's what Body Reborn was built out of. I know many people who are incredibly successful and have organizations that do incredibly important work. And they said, you know what, I'm really well positioned to do this. And so I'm going to start my organization because I believe that I have a particular skill set or intersection of skills that will lead to me developing something or co-creating something that is worthwhile and will help people. And so I think it's an intersection of those two things, figuring out what is the gap that is currently not being filled, what is the intersection of your skills and how can you fill that gap? And ultimately, do you have the right people that you can bring into the ecosystem to make your vision a reality?
Wonderful. And we have about 25 people currently watching from all over. So again, please let us know where you're watching from, your questions, your comments, just put it in the chat box and we'll try to weave them in as much as possible. So can you talk a little bit about Body Reborn and the kind of a little bit the focus, and was it purely volunteer? You had funding, how that morphed into Project Heal? And I mean, I think you've summarized pretty well, but kind of Project Heal is helping to make care for people who are challenged by eating disorders to provide as much care as possible for free for diverse communities. So kind of the differences between the two and a little bit about the scale of operations of Project Heal. So are you serving people in the New York City area, across the Northeast, and kind of where you're at and where you hope the impact might grow to?
Of course. So there were a ton of questions in that. So I'm going to break it down and go from past to present. So when I started Body Reborn, it was originally designed as a virtual community care space. And specifically, we wanted folks to be able to leave the space with their own healing plans, because some folks came to the space having a treatment team, they had a dietitian, they had therapists, and many others did not. And so we wanted to figure out, how can we help you build the infrastructure for your life where your healing and recovery journey and and supporting, a mental health or a state of mental health that you are excited about is sustainable. And so during that time, we helped folks craft healing plans that were intersectional. And so they specifically looked at thinking about all of your identities, thinking about all the systemic barriers that you face. What are the triggers that you might want to avoid or reduce in your everyday life? And how can this community co-facilitate that? What are the systemic barriers that potentially exacerbate your challenging relationship with food? And are there any ways that we can reconstruct or reduce those barriers that you face on a day-to-day basis in order to, again, change your relationship with food, make it a little bit easier, in addition to, the tangible shifts in eating disorder recovery? And so that was the community care portion of Body Reborn. The second portion was a peer mentorship portion. So we matched folks one-to-one with a peer mentor who's also a person of color with lived experience with the eating disorder to support them one-on-one and figure out, how am I going to heal? Having somebody there to support you on the hard days who actually gets it. And then the third portion that we added before we combined with Project Heal was a clinician mentor collective. So specifically eating disorder specialists who wanted to support folks of color who were healing their relationship with food, but they didn't quite know how. And so those clinician mentors served two purposes. Number one, they funded our community members to go through the community program for free. And number two, they also guided the peer mentors. So they provided them with feedback, helped them through their own healing journey, and helped them establish boundaries and infrastructure so that the peer mentors could then support community members. And when we were in conversation last year with Project Heal, again, before I joined and became CEO, around what does it mean to create equitable access to care? Project Heal started almost 16 years ago this year. initially to create access to eating disorder treatment. And so they placed folks with, or they matched folks with eating disorder treatment centers and placements. And it was wonderful. The people who needed to get treatment were able to. And fast forward to almost 16 years later, now we've created this incredible pipeline of programs that allows folks to pick and choose and figure out what do I need in order to heal my mental health and again, heal my relationship with food. And so, as I said before, and I won't wax poetic about it, that is from the clinician assessment, treatment placement, cash assistance, meal support, and whatnot. And I believe your earlier question was, how did Body Reborn combine its Project Heal? It became the community care portion of Project Heal that we hope to expand in the future. And right now, as I said, Project Heal is focused on access to care. How do we increase the number of people that can access eating disorder care? And I think at many times, eating disorder care has a very particular connotation. I'm curious for you, Craig, is there any person, anybody who might pop into your mind when you think of the word eating disorder?
Oh yeah, I mean, there are people in my family, who've suffered. I mean, both friends. I mean, friends who suffered from bulimia, or people in my family. I mean, there is the stereotype, or at least the image that often it's let's say, Caucasian woman, let's say between 15 and 25. But obviously it's all over the place. And I don't want to say that image or stereotype represents the population. So kind of getting to your question to me, and, and thankfully the people, both friends and family have, I mean, I don't know, they probably would use the term recovered, or at least in remission. So I'd be curious to know what terminology within Project Heal people prefer to use, or it might just be individual. But what is some of the data that, so kind of how would you respond to the question you're asking me? So, is people who are affected by eating disorders, is it represented equally across all the population, or is it more concentrated in certain groups or age groups?
Yeah, so the data is still ever emerging, but we know that, for example, communities of color experience eating disorders at the same rate as Caucasian communities. We know that, we have the research on it. But when we think about even the breadth of eating disorders, there is anorexia, there is bulimia, there is binge eating disorder. There are so many eating disorders that fall into the very broad category. And so one of the things that Project Heal has tried to do and continues to do is break down the stereotype of who experiences eating disorders and help make us more aware, because we are advocating for access to care and we're creating access to care. And a part of that is making sure that we break down some of the stigma attached to the term eating disorder and break down who actually experiences it, because we know that it's everyone. And so to your earlier point, we function nationally, and we're very proud to have grown our operations over the past 16 years to be national and to really focus on how can we make eating disorders a part of the national mental health conversations, because the comorbidities, comorbidities are people who experience multiple mental illnesses at the same time is very high with eating disorders, or multiple illnesses at the same time. And so when we think about making eating disorders a part of that larger mental health conversation, we also talk about substance use disorder. We also talk about anxiety disorder, or different anxiety disorders.
So thank you so much. So a little bit kind of speaking about Project Heal, because obviously everybody is accountable to somebody. And so you're accountable to your team, to your community, also to funders. And so thinking about, how do you demonstrate success, whatever that means? So is it the percentage of people who've gone through programs, or the percentage of people who either self-rate or other rate that they're in remission or recovery, whichever, or whatever terminology you want to use, or that after X amount of time, they haven't had a relapse. So in terms of like the metrics, you don't have to share everything, but how do you think about the accountability, both to the staff, the community, and donors?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So in terms of our impact metrics, we specifically focus on the number of people that we were able to serve. So again, Project Heal specifically creates direction or matching to these different services, as opposed to providing the services ourselves. So the only service that we provide ourselves at this point in time are our clinical assessments. So folks who come to us, and we provide them with a free assessment to identify whether or not they have an eating disorder. So they can take that information and either go back to their insurance or get a placement in a treatment center or with a clinician. And the other direct service we provide is community care. But the main impact metrics we look at are the number of people that we serve and the number of services delivered and the breakdown between our different programs. So between treatment placement, insurance navigation, the number of single case agreements we're able to secure with insurance. And then we also look at the number of partners that we have. So we have over 300 Healer Circle partners, which are treatment centers and clinicians that have donated their services pro bono so that people can access care that they never would have had access to. And the line of communication, because it's not all quantitative, the line of communication that we have not only with our partners, but with folks who have gone through our programs and received funding is what happened next. What does their life look like now? And so we do our best to gather not only anecdotal data, but qualitative data around that specifically so that we can ensure that we're getting a holistic view, because to your point, there are some people in your life that that would use the term recovered. I personally use the term on a healing journey or healed. I think the past tense versus present tense, people, it is up to the individual. I personally believe that we are always on a healing journey. And so it's an ever evolving process.
Okay. So just one more question, then we'll get back to career questions. So if someone is watching this now or listening in the future and he or she or they might be impacted by challenges around eating disorder or have someone in their family, obviously it's all context and geographic and person specific, but if it's the person themselves or a family or friend, like what is one or two things you would just say like that you most often find helpful to share with people who are maybe struggling with this or trying to help others struggling with this in terms of a resource, or they're not alone, or like just, is there something you found the most useful when talking to people, where they're affected by these challenges or their family members?
Yeah. The response differs a little bit depending on if I'm speaking to the family member or the person themselves, but I think it has the same undertone in that what I most often say is, if you haven't been told before, it's not your fault. We live in a society that is primed, right, from the messages that we get on social media to the traumas that many of us have to experience on a daily basis. That leads to the evolution of eating disorders in many ways. Eating disorders are developed by a number of factors, right? They're biological, they're psychosocial, they're environmental. And so as we try to uncover the depth of the causes of eating disorders, we know that they're informed by so many things. And so ultimately, I want folks to understand that even though it is often positioned as a disease of vanity, it's not. And that there are resources and care and people who will care about you, even though it's not a linear process. And in terms of resources, of course, depending on what the person needs, I often recommend Project Heal, but there are a number of other organizations out there. And we have them listed on our website, some who are in our Healer Circle, some who are not. And so if anybody visits www.theprojectheal.org, you can find more resources and the type of care that you need.
And then just one more question along this line. So if someone is outside of the US, whatever part of the world, does Project Heal potentially offer referrals or services, or right now it's for the US? And whether I live in Colombia, or whether someone's in France or South Africa, like, is there anywhere, obviously could someone approach Project Heal and you might give them some references, or the other peer organizations that you might say, or global network that, if someone is challenged or facing a difficulty, like here's a place to at least start and get information or referrals?
Yeah. So I deeply appreciate that you naming that Project Heal is specifically focused on the US, because for any folks in the US who are familiar with the US healthcare system, it is very challenging, very complex. And so we want to focus on how we can service folks best. And so that is US specific. However, there are a number of of other organizations, both nonprofit and otherwise, that are based outside of the US. And so if anybody emails contact@theprojectheal.org and shares where they're from or what type of resource they're looking for, we're happy to refer you to the ones that we're aware of.
Getting back to career questions. So thank you for this. And again, if someone's watching this, please check out Project Heal and other organizations. So can you think about, in terms of the skill set you're using as CEO of a Project Heal, which is a nonprofit organization, what are some of the skills that you developed from your previous work or academic training or just self-learning? And what for people who aspire to a leadership role in the impact space? Obviously, it's all context specific, but do you recommend, hey, get the management skills or get the finance skills or the people skills? I mean, obviously, it's all those things, but also thinking about along your career journey, when you've been part of hiring processes or in your current role, where do you see the greatest need for skills as people, whether they're mid-career or juniors, are thinking about if someone wants to work at the health and impact space, maybe you see there's more opportunity and more need in these areas.
Yeah. So ultimately, my role is predominantly relational. I wouldn't be successful in my role if I was not focused on the relationships that I'm cultivating with the folks that we serve, with our partners, with donors. And so in terms of the types of skills that you need to cultivate, even thinking about how you can practice building relationships with your team members and consistently contributing to their growth and their vision of themselves. Ultimately, whenever I go into a conversation, unless it's something like this and I'm speaking about myself and my work, I try to figure out, what does that person need and how do they see themselves? Where do they want to see themselves? And how can I help them get there in some way, shape, or form? And that might be tangible, and it might be creating an introduction that will be beneficial in their work, or it might be mentoring them in some way. But oftentimes, it's just listening and learning more about them and learning more about their needs, because I think the thing that has made me most successful in my career is that relationship building aspect, which also makes me a good connector. I think I spend at least 5 to 10 hours every week connecting folks and saying, I know that this person is doing this work. There's somebody else in my network who I may not have actively thought about their work for a little bit, but I know that this is what they were last doing. Let me send them a quick message to understand what their current needs are and if this point of contact would be a helpful introduction. Because ultimately, that's what social change work is. It is creating ecosystems that people can thrive in. You can't do that without the relationships necessary. So that's a bit of the softer answer to your question. But ultimately, I think that the harder skills that have served me the best in this role, and even in the roles leading up to it, are specifically around finance and nonprofit management. But again, I've spent my career in nonprofit work, so that's obviously context dependent.
Okay. So thinking about hiring, whether it's at Project Heal or previously, you can't share all the details, but if you have any examples you've helped hire or been part of a search process, how many applications you might be receiving, and what is some advice for people who are applying for roles? What makes, let's say you get 300 applications, what makes them get into, let's say, the top 5% where they're actually at least getting a second look and potentially interview? So any advice in general? Again, I know it's all context and role and person specific, but your advice for people applying for jobs to someone who might be recruiting or has recruited.
Yeah. I think the most applications I have ever seen for a role that I was hiring for was, I think it was close to 500 applications, maybe slightly over. So it was a significant number. And I'm very thankful and grateful to the people that were on the hiring team with me, because though I was the hiring manager for the role, I did not review all of those intro applications. So I'm very, very grateful for that, or those first round applications. What I will say is what often makes folks stand out, especially nowadays where we have the LinkedIn Easy Apply feature. I don't want to share the same advice that everybody else has in terms of make sure that you customize your cover letter and your resume. But ultimately, I want to be able to look at somebody's resume, cover letter, or whatever other materials are provided. And those special materials are really the place to do so and understand not just why this role, but why this organization. So there are a few things that I'm looking for and throughout the hiring process that I won't be able to deduce all on a first glance, but if I can, that only adds to the application. It's specifically around culture fit. And so thinking about the context of our organization, we are playful, we're fun, we're professional, and we ultimately care deeply about equity. And so for the people who understand that that is a core part of the work that we do and not only mention in their application, but show it in some way on their resume, for example, through past work that they've done. So though you might be applying, we're actually hiring for a development director position now, though I might be hiring for a development director, ultimately equity is at the core of our organization. So I would love to see, even if it wasn't related to your role, how you've advocated for equity in previous roles. Have you worked on any special projects? Have you started working groups? What makes you, or rather your experience and intersection of skills, unique? And for folks who have had a lot of different jobs or even worked in different sectors, utilize that to your advantage. Transferable skills. That is one of the most common things I look for because I love to hire people from other sectors who have enough information to be successful in this one and have enough context, but also can bring some energy, intelligence, savvy in a discipline that our current team might not have as much of.
Wonderful. And again, for people watching, please let us know where you're watching or questions. So what is your advice for other social impact organizations around hiring in terms of trying to build an equitable and diverse pipeline as possible? And then just a related question in Project Heal, increasingly college or graduate degrees are wonderful, but some organizations more in the tech sector are starting to say lived experience or qualifications that you've developed outside of formal academic training could be equally valuable. So any thoughts from the hiring end, either from Project Heal or just things you've seen in the impact sector when organizations hiring, whether it's a development director, admin assistant, or chief of communications, how to actually make the hiring process itself as equitable as possible?
Got it. And so I heard two questions I want to clarify.
Yeah.
One is how do we increase the diversity in the pipeline? And then how to make the process itself as equitable as possible.
And also connected to skills versus degrees.
Got it. And so in terms of diversifying the pipeline itself, people don't know what they don't know. And so at the very, very top level, we try to diversify the platforms that we are on. So we're sharing the job posting on Idealist. We're sharing it in different Facebook groups, right? We want to make sure that we are reaching the folks that may have the appropriate skills and that they are coming from a diversity of places while still, maintaining alignment with our brand. So we're not sharing it in every Facebook group. They're very, very particular in terms of alignment with our work and organization. The second is the organizations that we establish partnerships with. So our partner organizations, whether we have an active initiative with them or not, are sharing information to folks in their immediate network and perhaps their email listservs that we are hiring. And so we try to make sure that we have a breadth of partner organizations that, again, are not just diverse in terms of identities, but also are diverse in terms of field. I would love to hire somebody who's from a different field and has lived experience with or familiar experience with, right, in some way with an eating disorder. And they may never have worked in the eating disorder field before. That's wonderful. You bring a new perspective and you might be able to fill that gap that we have. And then third is specifically on what are you doing when you're not hiring? So we have the diversity of groups that you post in, we have the diversity of partner organizations, but ultimately, how are you becoming an organization that people who are perhaps different from your current team or your current organization's employees want to work at? And so that's something that we try to maintain alignment with throughout the year. Okay. And so can you remind me of that next question? Sorry.
Just in terms of graduate, like let's say undergrad or grad degrees versus lived experience, either what you've seen in work you've done or with partners or within Project Heal, is an undergraduate degree or graduate degree a requirement, preferred, or as long as someone has sufficient experience and can show the skills?
Mhm. So it obviously depends on the role. For example, when we were hiring for a chief clinical officer, we obviously need somebody who is a clinician and therefore has that graduate degree. But otherwise, we don't have those stipulations, because I do believe that both lived experience and deep immersement in the communities that you are trying to serve is incredibly beneficial. That combined with a desire to learn and grow. And so what I'm always looking for, regardless of the degree or not, is how have you upskilled since that point in time? Perhaps both through your job, but outside of it as well. Have you done research, volunteer opportunities? What does your life look like outside of work that is going to enhance the employee that you are and how you can contribute to our mission?
So for people who might be listening now or in the future, when they're thinking about working at the intersection of health and social impact, which can mean lots of different things, any advice of term where you see, there's the need is everywhere. The question is, where is there resources? Because everybody needs to make a living. So, any advice in terms of these are the areas where you see more growth or where there could be maximum impact, like if more people join Project Heal or if more people became, RNs, or if more people went into community-based psychology. Obviously, again, all person specific, but any areas where you say, if you're thinking about upskilling or thinking about where the maximum impact, or maybe we need more people in advocacy and policy because so much of this is structural challenges. So any thoughts? It's a big question, but any thoughts or recommendations on that?
Yeah. We are always trying to fill gaps while building the system that we want. And so I say that because ultimately, I think that thinking into the next 15 to 20 years, people, particularly in the social impact sector, will not only need to upskill in AI, but understand how they can scout for threats and plan for those threats that may come to their sector, to the communities that they serve 10 years down the road, and utilize AI to their advantage. I personally, when I am off the clock, which, I work many hours a week, but when I am off the clock, I'm consistently learning. I am reading books. I'm taking courses, both online and in person, specifically in computer science and AI, and trying to understand what do we need to look out for? Who do we need to hire in the future that is able to help us build this infrastructure? And how can AI support us? And I know, again, perhaps cliche or a bit of a buzzy term at this point in time, but we tend to, in the social impact space, in part because of a lack of resources, be behind the curve. And so what ends up happening is that we are not only struggling to catch up, but struggling to catch up with a gap in resources that is ever widening. And I think that is more pertinent today than it ever has been before. And so figuring out how can you as a professional right now upskill and find that intersection of AI and social impact, because you have that commitment to the cause that you are serving, and help others upskill as well.
We do offer a course in AI and social impact, and obviously been diving a lot into that. And there is so much exploration of both the existing potential of AI to help free up time for social impact, to do data analysis, data visualization, but there's so much baked in inequity in the models that so much of AI is based in. So and increasingly it's being used in the health sector and all sectors. So like the algorithm, can't even pronounce the word, but the discrimination of algorithms is a real challenge. So does this mean maybe?
Oh no, go ahead.
Go ahead. Does this mean maybe in the next 1 to 3 years you might have a, let's say, AI and ethics or impact person on your team, or maybe outside consultants?
Maybe it's a conversation that we're having, but again, to do so in a way that is as beneficial as possible, because not having the information is dangerous in and of itself. So whether or not we will actively utilize AI in our work, specifically in terms of engaging with our communities, I both cannot say, and We are not nearly at that point yet. I think it will come sometime down the road because we might all be forced to shift how we work. However, what I'm most interested in is understanding what evolutions there are in AI and how we can be prepared. So understanding what threats are our communities facing that we now have to support them with. And I recently read a book called Unmasking AI. I believe it's My Mission to Protect What is Human in a World of Machines. And I think that is a great introductory book for many who are trying to think about AI at the intersection of equity.
Yeah, is that by, I forgot her last name. Is that the book?
I believe Joy Bulamwini.
Yes. Yeah,
And
I haven't read it. It's on my list.
Her name. Yes.
Yes. Please check. And also Flynn Coleman wrote a book called A Human Algorithm, which is probably like 2 years old. She was on our podcast. It's brilliant. And basically her argument is like, it's here. This is before, OpenAI totally launched. But if we don't engage with it and shape, doesn't mean we have to use it, but if we don't engage and shape it, like we need the poets and the philosophers and the artists and community health workers, if we just leave it to the tech bros, we're going to be in deep trouble. So, at least understanding how it could be used and challenging it. So just 2 or 3 more questions. So one is working. I mean, a lot of social impact work is a long, hard slog against huge systemic challenges. So what are your thoughts around whether it's your current work or other work you've done or partners you've seen, how to avoid burnout, both there's the individual level and there's also like the organizational level. So just any thoughts, because I've burnt out multiple times. I know lots of people, some people, their lives are under threat. Other times it's just too much work. Other times it's lack of resources, but just thoughts around how to reduce the chances of burnout individually and organizationally.
Yeah. So organizationally, we actually redid this at the start of this year. We built and had all of our employees engage with a priority framework. So taking a look at their work, and especially for the folks who said, I am overwhelmed, this is too much. We had them categorize all of the different buckets of work that most often populated their weeks and figure out what's going to stop, what's going to be paused, what is going to be streamlined, and what is going to continue, and potentially what's going to be partnered on, right? So stop, pause, partner, provide, and then streamline. And ultimately, the goal was to have this matrix, have folks commit to it for a set period of time, and evaluate during that time, does this feel right? Is this actually impacting the ultimate mission in the way that we want it to? And having their manager and their other colleagues to hold them accountable to that, because it's really easy to slide back into burnout if that's tied with your definition of success and the organization's definition of success. And so we both created a framework that made it easier for folks to both reduce the amount of work that they were doing and reduce the total amount of work that they were doing and increase the amount of most impactful work that they were doing, because not everything is going to get done at the same time. There's 1,000,001 needs. Not everything can be done at the same time if we want to ultimately move our mission forward. And then individually, this is going to sound, again, perhaps cliche, but I have a very specific morning routine that I've cultivated over time that makes me feel energized and excited. And that includes breath work and meditation. That includes different grounding exercises throughout the day. And ultimately, I have a community. I have a life and family and loved ones outside of work that help me become re-energized and remind me to relax. And so though I work a lot, I'm always trying to figure out ways to support the life that I have inside of work and outside of it. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily running from one or the other. When I have experienced deep burnout in the past, it's because I didn't have that appropriate understanding of how I'm finding joy and purpose and success in my life outside of work. And so I actively try to disentwine that and, create other meaningful things.
Wonderful. So for Project Heal itself, for anyone listening now or in the future, obviously resources, if anybody wants to donate, what are other ways that people could potentially, the job opening, you talked about the head of development, but other ways, people could partner? I mean, obviously, what's the best channel to engage with Project Heal? So what are the ways you're looking for others to potentially help your work?
Of course. So number one is fundraising. So if you either specifically want to donate or if you want to raise funds through an event that you're hosting and a portion of the proceeds go to Project Heal, we are always deeply, deeply grateful because that is allowing us. Last year, we reached over 2,000 people directly and provided them with free treatment placement, right? Some who were hospitalized and some who now have clinicians, right, for almost an entire year for free. So fundraising is a part of it, whether it is direct donations or through a portion of your proceeds from an event or whatnot going toward us. The second is introductions. If you know anybody that you believe would be beneficial to our work or vice versa, we could be beneficial to their work, please let us know, recommend organizations. And again, you can send that to contact@theprojectheal.org because we're always looking for new partners and figuring out how we can build this ecosystem of care together. And we love partners outside of the eating disorder space because, again, eating disorders intersect with every other issue. It's not just this small world that we inhabit. And so we are pushing that forward into the larger health equity conversation. And then last is if anybody wants to volunteer or engage with us on a deeper level, we do have our ambassador program, who are specifically folks who, again, not only volunteer for Project Heal, but many who fundraise as well. And so if you are interested in that, reach out to us and we would love to hear from you.
And then my last question, you talked about the upskilling that you're doing, but this has nothing to do with upskilling. Is there any book, podcast, movie, show that has been occupying your brain in a positive way that doesn't have anything to do with work, but just kind of you might recommend others check out?
Ooh, that is a wonderful question. So a lot of the books that I read, some are work oriented and some are, for personal. But I'm trying to think of the book that I just picked up. I just picked it up at the airport yesterday, which is why I am forgetting the name of it. But Unmasking AI actually was the book that I read the most recently that wasn't specifically for upskilling. I just had an interest in it. I recently actually reread a book called Random Family, which is about a family in the Bronx and specifically their engagement, or the impact that the cocaine epidemic in the 80s in New York City had on them. And so that was a book that actually my father and I read together, and it was the first book that we read together, which was really nice. So that's not necessarily positive, but I do listen to audiobook summaries. So I have this app called Headway. This is not an ad, I promise. But I have this app called Headway that has short audiobook summaries. And so every morning I'll listen to a different one. So I would highly recommend that.
Okay. Yeah. I'm addicted to podcast and Scribe, which has changed their name to Everand, but it's like the Netflix of books. And I'm always listening to audiobooks or things and I've heard of Headway. So, and then finally, the last question, just for Project Heal or for you, is LinkedIn the best channel? Like you have a weekly newsletter, a monthly, like obviously there's lots of channels, but if someone just wants to follow your work and or Project Heal, LinkedIn, subscribe to the newsletter, what's the best channel?
Yeah, to follow Project Heal's work, specifically go to our website and we have a newsletter button both on the top and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom. And so you can subscribe to our newsletter and you'll get all of the updates from us. If you specifically want to follow my work, reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message, follow me, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and energy and the really impactful work you're doing, especially while you're traveling. So taking some time out of that and for all your recommendations. And as we started off, just a couple of reminders. So please consider following Akiera on LinkedIn, Project Heal on their website. If you potentially are interested in donating or kind of being an ambassador or work for an organization or a professional who might be able to provide services, get in contact. If you like the podcast or if you don't, hopefully you will like it, but please check out the 140 other episodes and consider rating and sharing. And we're in the middle of season 12. There's lots of amazing guests. And Akiera, thank you so much for all you do and the amazing impact. And obviously I wish there were, this is a whole nother podcast. I wish there was enough resource. There are enough resources in the world. We just don't spend it the right way. So I wish there was, like you could have all the resources that you need and your partner organizations to actually help as many people as possible. And hopefully you'll keep getting closer to that mission. So thank you so much. And for everyone watching, and have a wonderful morning.
Thank you. You too, Craig. Bye, you all.
Thank you.